Hello my fellow bats, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mel, for those of you who are new here. So for today's story, or book, well I guess it's like, okay, compared to like a book, this is more like a short story kind of thing, but it was recommended by one of you guys, like one of you guys wanted me to do this one, so here I am. The story that we're going to, or the book that we're going to be talking about today is called Rappaccini's Daughter, and it is by the great Nathaniel Hawthorne. I will leave all of the makeup that I'm using in the description box, okay? So please don't ask me. It was written by Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1844. It's kind of like a story within a story, except not really. So anyways, the story begins with this dude named Giovanni, okay? And it's set in Italy, okay? And so I'm not gonna be, there's some names in here that I'm sure I will get wrong or that I just won't pronounce, even try pronouncing at all. So this dude named Giovanni, right? He's this young man. I guess he has blonde hair. Not that that matters too much, but I like to, and while I'm reading, it's kind of like I'm watching a movie in my head, right? So I like to imagine, what, is this working? Barely. It said he was fair. He was a beautiful young man. Anyways, his name's Giovanni, right? And he is a student. He moves from southern Italy to go study at the University of Padua. Is that what it is? When he goes there, he stays at this, it's described as an old edifice. So I had to look up what an edifice was. It's basically just like a big building with a ton of rooms. So I imagined in my head, it was kind of like an inn / a castle. It's fine. And there just so happens to be this beautiful, gorgeous garden outside of the window of the room that he's staying in. So he's like, oh, that's nice. Who does this garden belong to? Because it has all sorts of, like, it's not like a normal garden, right? It ain't got no vegetables or like normal flowers or anything like that in there. It has like all this weird stuff. It belongs to this dude named Rappaccini, who is a doctor, but he's like a special kind of doctor, right? So he's looking in this garden. He sees this old man. He doesn't know it's Dr. Rappaccini yet, but he sees this old man in the garden who very much looks old, right? But he looks, you can tell he's intelligent, especially with the way he's observing the plants and looking at them, just the way he's doing his thing. You can tell he's very intelligent, but it's like a cold kind of intelligence. Like, he's very calculating, just very, you get the vibe. He's very ambitious when it comes to his line of work, and so he's sitting there going around to the different plants, observing them without coming into direct contact with them, because turns out most of those plants are like poisonous and stuff. And so he gets to this one particular, I hope I can do this because I normally don't contour my nose with a sponge. Oh my gosh, there's a garden, right? And in the middle-ish of this garden is like the ruins of a fountain, right? The water is still running, but you can tell it's not as gorgeous as it probably used to be back in its prime time. Near this fountain is a particular shrub. It's gorgeous, and he doesn't know this yet, but it also smells gorgeous, right? It's apparently very poisonous, because when Dr. Rappaccini approaches the shrub thing, it's like it has all these beautiful purple flowers on it, but when he approaches it, he has to put on like this kind of mask. He tries approaching it with this mask on, doesn't work out. He's too afraid of it. He's like, oh my gosh, this is too much. So then he calls his daughter Beatrice. He's like, Beatrice. I don't know how he says it, but that's how I imagine he says it. And Beatrice comes running out. Giovanni sees this. Giovanni's watching all of this. And Beatrice comes running out of the house, or their house or building or whatever, to him. And he's like, hey, take care of this shrub because it's too poisonous for me. I can't handle it. So she's like, okay, yeah, sure. And Giovanni notices that she has this like weird affinity for the plant. Like, she treats it with care. And while I was reading this, I was like, okay, so if it's so dangerous and poisonous, like Rappaccini said, then how come he has to like wear all of this protective gear? Because he also has gloves on, but his daughter doesn't need to. And I'm like, is she immune to it or something? We don't know yet. But that's like what I'm thinking, right, while I'm reading this. Okay, you know what? I need to take a second to do my eyebrows. Rappaccini eventually catches Giovanni watching them. And he's like, yeah, no. So he basically just drags Beatrice inside. They both go inside. And basically, Beatrice is like, well, and just the whole thing and how weird it was is just like on Giovanni's mind for like the rest of the day and night. So the next day, Giovanni goes to visit the professor of medicine at the university. Wow, that was like way too much. Oh my gosh, way too much powder. Oh my gosh. Who just also so happens to be a friend of Giovanni's father. Of course, he asks the professor about Rappaccini, and he tries to, you know, like, I mean, he asks about the doctor and everything, but the professor can tell he really wants to know about his daughter, right? There's like, it's not really like a rivalry, but within the world of science and medicine and all that, there's like a bit of a rivalry between, oh, the professor's name is, I had to write it down because I knew I wasn't gonna remember. Signor Pietro Baglioni. Giovanni doesn't know this, but there is a bit of a little something going on between them. They just have differing views. Baglioni talks about how Rappaccini isn't exactly the best person. Like, he's kind of sketchy in terms of his practice of science and medicine and all that, and he talks about how he's done miraculous things. By miraculous, it's like, wow, how'd that happen, or whatever. He talks about how he understands nature and the way it works so much more. He talks about how brilliant Rappaccini is, but not always for the best of reasons. Like, he doesn't always have good intentions, basically. And think like how certain doctors and scientists in history have used their intelligence and understanding and stuff for, I mean, they claim it's for the good of science or whatever. It's like, you know, putting people through bad things for the sake of others. You kind of get my drift. So I totally messed up my eyebrow. And then eventually, of course, the conversation goes towards, what's her name? Beatrice. And so all he really has to say is, yeah, she's beautiful, and, you know, because she's Rappaccini's daughter, she's kind of like famous because everyone knows Rappaccini. So therefore everyone knows about his daughter, but no one's like come in contact with his daughter, stuff like that. There's just rumors that she's very beautiful, very intelligent, just like her father. Well, her father's not beautiful, but you know what I mean. So yeah, but he's also like, but you should stay away from her because she's Rappaccini's daughter, right? Who knows what kind of thing is going on there. Of course, Giovanni pays no heed to this, right? He's like, yeah, whatever. She's cute. So on his way back to the place he's staying, he buys a bouquet of flowers. He's watching again, and he's hoping Beatrice will come out, and she does. And so he just watches her. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. So he just keeps watching her like a weirdo. And so some weird things happen while he's watching her. Like, the way she calls that weird poisonous plant that no one can touch her sister, and she's like, oh, my sister, give me your breath, or something, some weird stuff like that. And he's like, okay. Something weird happens. So he notices she plucks a flower from the shrub, right, and smells it, and everything's nice, whatever. And there's like a lizard. There's a lizard on the ground, okay? And Giovanni sees it, and a bit of I've never had this experience, at least not this way, but sometimes, you know how like when you pluck a flower, or I've seen it mostly with dandelions where you pluck it and then some stuff comes out of the bottom, and it's like, you know, flower juice or whatever. So that happens. Some of the flower juice, we'll call it that, falls from the flower where she plucked it onto the lizard, and the lizard immediately like dies. It like keels over, and Giovanni's like, what the heck? And he can't tell. So while he visited the professor of medicine at the university, right, they had some wine, so he's like, whoa, is this because of the wine? Like, what's happening? And he's like, it's fine, whatever, it's fine. So he keeps watching her, whatever, she's just doing her thing, strolling, taking care of plants, you know. Oh my gosh. So she ends up at the particular portion of the garden that's directly below Giovanni's window. She's doing something, I don't know what, but she's like talking to herself or something, just like breathing. And it's so funny because sometimes these stories, they just don't make sense. There's like this little insect that flies by in front of her, and she breathes on it, not intentionally, but her breath is there. The insect flies by, right? She's talking, breathing, whatever. And when the insect like gets in the vicinity of her breath, it dies. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's just like, it's funny. You know, eventually her eyes wander up to the window and she catches Giovanni watching her. And Giovanni, you know, like you do weird stuff when you're caught doing something. He's like, he freaks out and he throws the bouquet at her, and he's like, here, you cute, have these. So she's like, cool, thanks. She grabs them and then she runs back into the house. That's basically what happens. I need to do my makeup. Do my makeup, okay. But he thinks, he's not sure, but he thinks he sees, as she's running away, like just before she disappears behind some shrubs or whatever. Oh my gosh, he thinks he sees the flowers, like the flowers of the bouquet that he just gave her, like dying, like wilting. He's like, nah, I'm just going crazy. So for the next few days, that's like all he can think about is like her and that incident and all the weird stuff that happened. And he's kind of like going crazy, and he avoids the window because he's just like emotional, right? Okay, so he's like walking around mindlessly, kind of. He runs into the professor friend, right? The professor friend is trying to get him to talk, but he's kind of like in this like weird dazed kind of, I don't know, like state. And Giovanni's frustrated. He's like, I don't have time to talk right now. I just need to think and be weird and do my thing and maybe go see Beatrice again. And so the professor keeps trying to warn him, like, hey, dude, stay away. And then while they're talking, Rappaccini shows up, walks by, and the way he looks at Giovanni is weird. He looks at him coldly, like a subject he's observing or something like that. And then, what's his name? Baglioni, or whatever the professor's name was. He's like, dude, you're in trouble. Because the way he'd be looking at you, you must be like a subject of one of his experiments or something. Stay away from his daughter, fool, okay? Because clearly he's got some kind of plan, mischief, whatever going on. Wow, this color is so pretty. I like it. I thought it would be too bright for me, but I like it, and I'm sure once I add black, it'll look better. He runs into, what's her name? She has a name, but it doesn't really matter. The lady who owns the place, or who, you know, he pays to stay there. She's like, hey, I know a way into the garden, a secret way into the garden. And he's like, dude, tell me. So he gives her some money, of course, because you got to bribe everybody to do something. So he pays her to show him the way into this secret way into the garden. So he gets into the garden. He's like, oh my gosh, this can't be real. It's like too good to be true, right? So he gets there. He's like, wow. And so he's looking around. And of course he runs into Beatrice. And she's like obviously like kind of shocked, but like, oh, okay, there's a man here. So they get to talking and hanging out and stuff, and they just get to know each other, right? And they slowly obviously start to fall in love, and he learns that she's very innocent and she's never left the house. She doesn't know anything of the world, and she knows some stuff, like her father's taught her some stuff, but not like everything. But they never touch each other. They only express their quote-unquote love in terms of words. Throughout their whole getting to know each other thing, it's interesting because Giovanni goes back and forth between like being weirded out by her, like being afraid, because she, over time, he learns that she's basically like walking poison. Okay, like everything she breathes on dies, and everything she touches, unless it's that one plant or whatever, dies. And her breath is like sweet, but he gets like kind of lightheaded and faint whenever he breathes into too much of it, which sounds like a weird thing to say. But there's like one day where they're talking, doing their thing, whatever, and they get to the fountain with the big giant poisonous shrub, and he reaches out to touch it, and she's like, no, basically. She's like, touch it not. And she's like, it'll prove fatal or whatever, just don't touch it, it's bad, okay? And so in doing so, she like, when she's like, no, don't touch it, she reaches out her hand and touches his hand to grab it and, you know, pull him away. That's important to know. And he's like, okay. So yeah, this whole time it's interesting because he can tell, he goes back and forth because he can tell Beatrice is like, she's the sweet young woman who doesn't really know much other than what her father has taught her and stuff like that, and things they've talked about, because she asked him a lot of questions about the world and just like what's out there, right? But she's literally like walking poison. It's like she's good but she's bad. It's so weird. Like he's like trying to convince himself that that's not really what it is, right? Like he's trying to say, I'm just crazy, basically. Like that's not what's actually happening. She's just this. It's like, you know how like I don't want to say love blinds, obsession, infatuation, passion blinds. I'll say that. That's basically how it was. And he's just kind of, you know, they're just doing this for a while. So eventually, you know, one day he goes back, or that same day when he tried touching the shrub, and she was like, no, don't do it. And she ended up touching him. So later that, was it later that evening or the next morning? Something like that. Later, he notices on his hand, like purple, black, like bruise looking marks on his hand. And they're in the shape of like fingers, like petite, cute little fingers. And then there's like a slim thumbprint kind of thing on his wrist. And he's like, wow, that's weird. It's fine. That's weird, but it's fine. That's basically what he says. He's like, it's fine, just ignore it. Eventually, you remember the professor friend? So he comes over to visit Giovanni one time, and Giovanni just, this whole time, he's just been in his own world, just him and Beatrice hanging out, doing their thing, right? So the professor comes over, and he's honestly kind of like annoying to Giovanni at this point. He's like, dude, just go away. I don't want to be with you. I just want to be either alone or with Beatrice. That's it. That's his attitude. And so the professor friend is like, do you read, or do you read classics? Da, da, da. He's trying to start this conversation. So he tells him about this story that he read. Long story short, basically, this dude gives his daughter or a woman or princess or whatever as a gift to another king or something like that. but she was like poisonous, I think that's what he said. He said, a certain sage physician happening to be present discovered a terrible secret in regard to her, that this lovely woman had been nourished with poisons from her birth upward until her whole nature was so imbued with them that she herself had become the deadliest poison in existence. Poison was her element of life. And so he's like, isn't that interesting? And Giovanni's like, oh, it's just a childish fable, it don't mean nothing. And the professor's like, look dude, I ain't got time to play around with you. Rappaccini's daughter is not good for you to be around, and I'm sure she's part of some sort of experiment that Rappaccini's doing on you, and you need to stay away from her, otherwise you might die. And Giovanni's like, look, I know you and my father were like friends, but I'm just like his son, like feel no obligation, right? Like I respect you, but you're not my friend. Like I respect you, you know, you're a professor, my father's friend, that's great, but don't tell me what to do, that kind of thing. And he's like, he just feels sorry for him, the professor, and he's like, okay, look, there's this vial, okay? It has like the most powerful antidote, can cure whatever poison, you know, whatever. Just here's that, I'll leave it for you. You know, use it whenever, if ever you feel the need to, okay? And with that, he leaves. Giovanni's like, yeah, whatever. So he takes it, puts it in his pocket, whatever. And it's about the time that he usually goes to see Beatrice. On his way out though, he's like, well, this whole time he's like thinking, he's going back and forth. Like, well, at least, right, at least her poison hasn't infected me, right? Like we've been hanging out for like a long time now and I'm fine. But he decides to like test it because he's being told all these different things and he feels all these different things and like whatever, it's just kind of a mess. So there's like, it's so random, you guys. It's just, while you're reading this, you're like, what the heck? So there's a spider in his room, okay, that's spinning its web. And Giovanni decides to breathe on it to see if it dies like the other insects did when Beatrice breathed on them, albeit unintentionally. And he breathes on it and it dies and he's freaking out. He's like, accursed. And he's like, he gets so mad at Beatrice. He's like, she's poisoned me. Like I've become kind of like her in a way. And he's just like really upset and he's all mad at her like it's her fault. Like, well, let's just keep talking. So he gets mad at her, right? He's very upset. And so he goes to meet her like normal or whatever, and he's mad at her. She, you know, she's sweet and she's like, oh, you know, hi. So, you know, there's some tension there, right? But eventually the conversation gets to the point where Giovanni's just like super upset and he's like, he starts calling her like names like Viper, I think, and stuff like that. It's just not nice. He's not being nice. And she's all calm, cool, and collected, like, let's just calm down, okay? I've been this way since birth. And she starts to, he like asks about the shrub thing and he's like, where did this come from? And she's like, oh, my father made it. And he was like, made it? What you mean he made it? Because, you know, we don't like make plants, we like grow them with seeds and stuff, but like there's nothing else like this in the world. Here's what she said. She said, he is a man, she's talking of her father, he is a man fearfully acquainted with the secrets of nature, and at the hour when I first drew breath, this plant sprang from the soil, the offspring of his science, of his intellect, while I was but his earthly child. I grew up and blossomed with the plant, and was nourished with its breath. It was my sister, and I loved it with human affection. There was an awful doom, the effect of my father's fatal love of science, which estranged me from all society of my kind. Until heaven sent thee, dearest Giovanni, oh, how lonely was thy poor Beatrice. And he's still mad at her, calling her, look, he's like, a cursed one, enticed me into thy region of unspeakable horror. Like, yeah, because she chose this, right? Okay. Like Giovanni shows her, hey, you know, you gave me what you have or whatever. And so he breathes on some insects that are flying by. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're right. And she's like, this is my father's doing. It's not my fault. Like, why are you blaming me? Calm down, basically. And he's like, okay, hold up. We can fix this. It's fine. Everything can be fine. It's fine. Just, you know, drink this stuff that my friend gave me because it'll, you know, make you better. And then you can, like, live with me and we can do our thing and everything will be fine. And she's like, okay. So she takes it, right? And she starts feeling faint. Rappaccini, after she drinks it, Rappaccini comes out and he's like, hey, pretending everything's fine. He's like, hey, y'all can be together now. Aren't you happy, Beatrice, that everything worked out and now you can have someone to, you know, be with you, live with you, you know, someone with the same quote-unquote condition, whatever. You should be happy. They're like, no, this is not okay. And his daughter's, you know, like, Father, how could you do this to me? Like, how is this okay? This is not okay. And he's like, what's wrong with you? Is it really that terrible? Like, calm down. So it gets to the point, you know, while they're all going back and forth about, you know, Rappaccini calls his daughter foolish because, and she's like, oh, I'd rather be loved than feared and all this stuff, right? But, like, long story short, it's not even a long story, but long story short, poison was life to Beatrice. So now the antidote was death for Beatrice. So it sucks. Like, the antidote killed her. And I'm like, no, I'm sitting here thinking that I thought that Giovanni was gonna, I need to bring this closer. I thought that Giovanni was gonna use it on himself to make himself better. But apparently that's not what happened, okay? He gave it to Beatrice, Beatrice took it, and she ended up dying from it. It doesn't say explicitly, like, what Rappaccini's reaction was to his daughter dying. So I love what he says at the end, after she dies. He says, and thus the poor victim of man's ingenuity and of thwarted nature and of the fatality that attends all such efforts of perverted wisdom perished there at the feet of her father and Giovanni. I love that. That says so much. But just to finish out the story before we get into, you know, what people think about it and all that stuff. Remember the professor friend? I know he has a name, but y'all know who I'm talking about. The professor friend looks down, he sees this happen, and he yells at Rappaccini, and he's like, hey, is this what you wanted? Is this what you were, what does he say? He says, and this is the upshot of your experiment. So he's like, this is the result of you trying to play God and do all this, do stuff you shouldn't be doing. What I did read, it was interesting because I guess there's like this debate about what this story is actually about. There's even a debate about whether or not this is Hawthorne's best work or his worst work, because no one really knows what it's about. Like, on the surface, it's like, oh yeah, science and how much it sucks when you try to play God and stuff like that, which is true, and I'm sure that is, you know, part of it. But there's also some, like, deeper stuff going on. There's many who believe that Beatrice is based on Hawthorne's wife, Sophia, to a degree. Because Sophia, like Beatrice, was nice, you know, sweet, you know, whatever, all that stuff. It's kind of like in a Gothic novel, how the heroine, the main female character, is seen as very pure and nice and innocent and whatever. It's kind of like that. So that was similar to his wife, but also there's this thing that was practiced. I had to look this up, but there's this thing that was practiced, and it was called what was it? Homeopathy? Homeopathy. Yes, homeopathy. The method of treating disease by drugs given in minute doses that would produce in a healthy person symptoms similar to those of the disease. Look, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, it's just, you know, where you like mix some stuff together that you got at home and use it to fix yourself. But that's not what it is. So I guess Sophia was suffering from a couple things. One of those was depression, but there was something else. Anyways, but like she was being treated through homeopathy or whatever. And Hawthorne didn't really like that. It was like sketchy, right? Especially back then. And so she would often suffer from like headaches and stuff like that. So there is like both a fear and a love from Hawthorne towards Sophia. So there's that aspect that many people believe that Beatrice is based off of Sophia. Also, Beatrice's, I read about this, it's so cool. So Beatrice's character is arguably based off of two other fictional Beatrices, okay? One is Beatrice in Dante's Inferno, or Dante's Divine Comedy. I think specifically Inferno. I don't know, I haven't read that in like years, but the Beatrice in there, she has a last name, I don't remember what it is. But then also Beatrice, was it Cecile? Beatrice Cenci from a story written by Shelley actually, called The Cenci. So all three Beatrices are Italian, okay? And all three die young, leaving a lover to live without them, basically. But it's interesting because these two other Beatrices, okay, are very different from each other. And it's like Hawthorne's Beatrice is kind of like the amalgamation of these two Beatrices to a degree. Dante's Beatrice is very pure. She's seen as like a spiritual perfection, okay? She's very innocent, right? Typical. But so there's that aspect of that Beatrice in Hawthorne's Beatrice. The other Beatrice is the exact opposite. She's described as like murderous and villainous and all this, but I'm like, dude. Okay, so I haven't read this story by Shelley, but from what was described in the essays or the papers, the articles that I read, apparently Beatrice Cenci was sexually abused by her father. So of course she wants to kill the man. So I wouldn't really call that, I mean, just because it's justified doesn't make it okay. But like, come on, dude. So she convinces her lover and I think some villagers and maybe her brother and stepmother, I don't know, something like that, to join in on the plan to kill her father. She unfortunately gets caught and she tries to pin it on her lover, the people who are gonna help her. So that's treacherous right there. That's what that is. She's not murderous, she's treacherous. She eventually gets put to death. There's those two aspects of those different Beatrices inside Hawthorne's Beatrice. Now, it's interesting because even though Hawthorne's Beatrice, it's like everyone's confused because she like she represents and supposedly, or is supposed to represent, you know, love and purity and spiritual perfection and all that great stuff. But everything she touches, everything she breathes on dies. She's like walking poison, right? So it's like there's that weird spiritual and physical dichotomy that trips people up, or at least people who have analyzed this story up. So I'm curious. I messed up this eye. There's also a couple of other themes. So there's the theme of, well, especially at the time it was written anyways, science was kind of like, I don't want to say taking over religion, but it was kind of like replacing it in a way. And it's like science was becoming the new religion, but obviously with that came a bunch of like corruption and stuff like that, right? So that's that. There's the quote-unquote theme of male disappointment in an idealized union with a desired female. So that's also a thing apparently, which I thought was interesting. Which, I mean, I guess I can see that, but it's also like yeah, I guess that's true, but like, it's annoying. And first of all, well, okay, I'm sure we all got a lot to say about that. Also, another theme, I wrote them down, okay, so that I wouldn't forget. Another theme is, quote, the problematic initiation of a young man into the ambiguities of good and evil. So, which, yeah, I can see that too. But then it's, well, I'm not gonna get into it. I'm not gonna get into it. That's a whole other discussion right there. One last theory that I want to share with you guys is, because it's like, there's this big question, like, why, right? That hasn't really even still to this day been answered, or at least at the time of the papers I read. They suggested that, yes, there's like this good, right? There's this good side or whatever. There's this goodness, this spiritual perfection, but in order to get there, you have to go through evil. Like, you have to go through all this hard stuff. Like, you have to, it's kind of like, in order to get to the end, so to speak, you have to suffer. So, which, I mean, I guess I can kind of see that, but also what I think, maybe it could be more of like a, like how good can be used, this sounds bad, just bear with me, how good can be used for evil, or like, or vice versa, like how evil can be used for good. I don't know. If y'all have any ideas, or if you agree or disagree with any of these theories or themes or whatever, let me know down below. I remembered lashes this time. Y'all can see, you're witnesses. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That would help me a lot, and it would let me know that you do in fact actually like these videos. Let me know if you liked the fact that I talked about, you know, different themes and stuff like that, like discussions around the content of the story, because I mean, sometimes I don't always have time because me telling the story takes up the whole video, but yeah, just let me know if that's something that you like, and I can try to include that more often in these videos, other than just telling you my opinion. But I did enjoy this. I'm biased. I don't think it's my favorite work by Hawthorne. My favorite has to be The Scarlet Letter. It was good. I mean, it is a short story. It's not a whole book like The Scarlet Letter is. So yeah, anyways, I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe. That way you don't miss them. I do my best to upload every Sunday. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.